Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Diane Ryan. Welcome, Diane.
Thank you so much, John. I'm really excited to be here.
Great. Grace Under Pressure is a show that focuses on what's too often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the connecting, the commitment we show toward others. And it's also about generosity, respect, and compassion. And when you act with grace as a leader, as you will know, Diane's example, you bring people together, especially in challenging times, and you mobilize people for positive actions. It is such a pleasure to have you. Welcome, Diane.
Thanks again.
Great. I want to tell folks all about you. You are the Associate Dean for Program and Administration in the Jonathan M. Tisch College of Civic Life at Tufts University. And that's why I want to talk about it. We met about a year and a half, and you told me your subject matter, and I said, wow, I need to know more. And in our time of political discord and everything, I think that civics has never been more in demand. And in my book, Grace, I focused a little bit on civics and civic examples. So it is an honor. So it is Dr. Reed, Professor Dr. Reed. Before that, you taught at the United States Military Academy. You are a veteran, an officer. Mm-hmm. And you have served our country. You are also an in-depth researcher, and I've been doing this longitudinal study on character and civics in the military. So, Diane, it is such a pleasure to have you. Welcome.
Thanks again, John.
Great. Okay. Tufts is the only school of its kind to have a university-wide civics engagement program. Tell me about it.
So the Tisch College is a college, a school at Tufts that has a dean. The dean sits on the president along with all the other deans. We have three main operating aims, and that's education, research, and practice that are all related to the intersection of higher education with civic life. So in a nutshell, that's what makes it distinctive. A lot of other schools have a center for public service or an institute for civic engagement. We've got a college with a dean research college. And, I think it really says something about how Tufts has placed it sort of a university as a priority.
Okay. Well, great. Diane, I'm getting a little bit of video breakup on you. Can you turn your camera off for a moment just to see, perhaps we'll just focus on audio, because you hear us now? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay,
yep.
Great. We'll keep it on there for just a little while, and maybe your signal will return, because your voice is strong and we certainly want to hear you. So you have also worked on something, and I believe you were doing this when you were in the military, or at least at the academy at West Point. Leaders of character. How do you define that term? What does it mean to be a leader of character?
So I pretty much in a nutshell would say a leader of character is who does the right thing all the time, even when no one is looking. The West Point motto is duty, honor, country. There's 7 values that the Army espouses: loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. So it's someone who embodies all of those and doesn't do it for any other reason than it's the right thing to do.
Great. So, and you have been studying, if I'm correct, this topic for a long period of time. If so, what changes are you noticing?
I'm mildly encouraged that there seems to be, an interest and a focus on the importance of it. And I know at the beginning of this, we said that Tisch College is the only university-wide initiative, but recently a college in the Midwest just stood up a school of public service that's sort of modeled after Tisch College. So I'm really hopeful that people will start to recognize that pretty much everything in the world revolves around good leadership, and it's imperative, particularly at this point in time, as you noted earlier.
Great. Do you think notions of character have evolved over time, or is character character? Your description is the one that I often use too. So,
I mean, I feel like character has remained pretty constant since the days of Aristotle, but certainly the environment and the challenges to being of good character have certainly changed. I think that we've kind of come to recognize is that, it's not a static thing, but it's really about having the right amount of character at the right time in the right place, right? So you can say, I really value integrity. And then, your friend, in your case, your wife comes in and says, do I look fat in this outfit? Is it the right place and the right time for you to say, yeah, honey, you look like you put on a few pounds, or is it better to say, like, I feel wonderful? So, it's recognizing that there's some specificity around, and that people bring different strengths to the table. And, there's an expectation of the 20 different characteristics, virtues. Not everybody is going to be a superstar on all of those at the same time. And so there's a lot of opportunities for growth and flexibility and so forth.
You're raising an interesting topic, and I was thinking of someone that I have admired in the leadership community for so long was Warren Bennis. And he wrote a seminal essay for Harvard Business Review when he talked about he had never met a senior leader who had not experienced the crucible of adversity or crisis. And so, and that's when character comes to the fore. Would you agree with that, Diane?
Yes, I absolutely would. And I know this piece that you're talking about because I'm teaching a class in global leadership at the Fletcher School, which is, and that's the week we're on developing leader identity, and Crucibles is one of the seminal articles that I have them read, because I truly believe someone's character is forged in adversity.
Right. Well, toward that end, I think it was John Wooden, the basketball coach, once said that sports don't develop character, they reveal it. And I think the same thing might be said of crisis. Would you say that? Would you agree with that, Diane?
I would absolutely agree with that. And, the growth through challenging experiences is a fundamental leader development. And that's certainly the model that we taught at West Point. And it's, what I bring with me today into my new role at Tufts.
Now, as talking to you, I'm remembering an example. I was working with a very senior leader in a major corporation. And this was, I want to say around the year 2000, when the dot-com bust. And then there was also the time of the scandals and Enron and WorldCom, and that's kind of the scam folks. And this gentleman was talking, and he said, he said, we talk about hiring for character. He said, but you can't teach character. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I would disagree with that. I believe that character is learned through role modeling, through learning to be immersed in an environment of character, through reading and exploring it. And so I do believe that character absolutely can be taught.
That's great. So, and then I'm really putting you on the spot here. So it's been said that children often know right from wrong, even from a young age. I mean, within reason of it. And so, if you haven't learned that, can you learn it? Do you have a perspective on that, Diane? So,
yeah. Again, I think it goes to having principled leadership, and being in a culture that either, if you look at, and I know you're familiar with this work of a full range leadership model, that there are certain levers can push and pull to motivate different people and influence them. People are going to be initially more motivated by carrot and stick sorts of things. So, if you reward good character and you hold accountable, things that you don't want people to replicate, then have a positive impact. again, the example that around them, and what is valued. I think that those are all important things for someone as they're developing their character. And I don't know if if I've emphasized this enough, but the role of reflection, right? And spending time to be mindful and to think about, what should I do in a particular situation? What did I do? What can I do better?
Right. You want to
the questions.
Oh, I love that. And Diane, let's try to turn your camera back on again and see if we're getting a better signal. And I thank you for being so careful.
I accidentally muted myself.
Okay. Okay.
I was thinking, I'm like, probably should tell my family, like, get off the internet.
Would that be an act of character, Diane?
I would ask.
Yeah. Anyway,
let me have my conversation with John.
Okay. Now tell me about, okay, let's describe what civic education is. I have a feeling it's something that I have this image that it was something that was fundamental to my grandparents and my parents' generation, but somehow along the way it got watered down. Am I right or wrong? I hope I'm wrong.
Possibly. I mean, there's, what we're generally taught in school as civics is kind of about good governance, right? We teach people about, this is about the founding of our country, Constitution, and the branches of government and those kinds of things. And that's important to have a fundamental understanding of how government works. But I also think in there is, how do we treat people and how do we behave, towards in groups and work towards collective goals. So at Tisch College, we have a framework that is in it, and it really applies to all three aspects: our education, our research, and our civic practice. But we look at civic identity, and that's the intra-person characteristics that people need to have. Like, that's really where character lives. It's
yes.
Our mentor Frances Hesselbein talks about leadership. Your civic identity: who am I? What's my purpose? How do I use my character strength for good out in the world? Okay. Then the next layer of that, and we think of this kind of logically, so the identity sits at the center because who you are is going to impact everything else around you. The next is civic leadership. So how do people interact socially in groups, thinking about what should we do, what is the right to do as a group, and what are the skills, abilities, knowledge that require people to be able to be effective in social settings and in civic settings. And then the third aspect is on the third layer, civic agency. So how do I use my talent, my influence to motivate other people, and my knowledge around bureaucracies, systems, like how things are interconnected, to have agency to be a positive agent for change in the community, environment, in my surroundings.
Great. And I'm sorry, we're still getting a little bit of a breakup on your image. So may I ask you to turn your camera off? I'm sorry. No, no. Now I'm going to clarify something. Thank you for that tripartite answer there. So when we talk about civic education, I'm guessing this extends far beyond what one normally thinks of as civics, i.e. local or state or federal government. You're talking about a way of life that would go into your chosen career. Am I correct in that, Diane?
Thinking about things that are to me, the causes, what do I value? Social emotional learning in education is a big area of effort right now, but largely under-resourced. And people sometimes say, like, oh, we don't need to teach this in school because that's what we're expecting parents to teach children at home. But you can't have these compartmentalizations, and I don't think you can make assumptions that parents are teaching these things at home. I know you need to have this authenticity that permeates in all these different aspects, because if someone's not getting it at home, if they can get it in school, then hopefully that, sort of balances that. But ideally they'd get it in all places.
Correct. Well, and so and endemic to what you're doing is also the notion of research. What does the research mean? What kinds of things are you studying?
Yeah. So we have research centers housed in Tisch College. So probably the longest serving and one of the most well known is the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement, Circle, which is 15 or 20 years old. It's been at Tufts now 12 years. And they got on engagement in a civic context. So they do a lot of research on things like, youth political engagement or youth civic engagement, positive youth development. Super busy in this past election season, asking young various issues, what's important to them. They do a lot of work in the K through 12 space in helping school systems and states develop their curriculum and things like that. So that's one of our research. We have the Institute for Democracy in Higher Education, which runs the largest study on college student voting. National study. It's NSOLVE. I can't remember exactly what the acronym stands for. And basically every 2 years, they are able to compare voter registration and voter data that are publicly available with registrar information for the colleges that are involved in the study. And then they're able to parse out like, okay, Tufts University, we want to know, did our how in last election, how many of them vote? Of course, we don't look at how they voted or any of those things, but just did they part in the civic responsibility, the civic duty of voting? Right. And how does that parse out by race and ethnicity and academic major and school? So I'll give you how those data are useful. So in 2014, I think we looked at our Tufts data, actually it probably was 2016. I came to Tufts in 2017. And we saw that our engineering students were voting at a significantly lower rate than students in arts and sciences. Well, that would make sense because, the political science and the international relations people are in arts and sciences, but we need engineers to do their civic duty as well. They also need to participate in our system of democracy. So we took that information and we designed a module to put first year engineering courses for engineers to understand, why do you need to be informed about different systemic issues, and here's some good messaging around voting and why voting impacts the profession of engineering. And then the next election, even though it was a midterm, we saw that difference not completely disappear, but it was greatly reduced.
Oh, that's great. Interesting. Now, so we have the emphasis on civic education and the research they're doing, which is many factors to it. And then there's something that you talk about, civic practice. Is that where the rubber meets the road, where you're putting civics or the ideals of civics into practice? Is that
right? So, I mean, that's sort of where all the extracurricular or faculty engagement with the community. I mean, all of these things are sort of overlapping. None of them, they all inform one another, right? So, what we tend to think of education as the formal processes of programs or curricula, classes that we're offering, and research is, what are the questions and how do we study them? And we try to make sure we do that community involvement and making sure, there's that mutual respect. And then civic practice is, basically what you might describe as volunteer work and things that you do in the community that you might not be studying something. It might not be part of a formal class, the right thing to do. Again, it's being an upstanding citizen and giving to others.
Great. Now, tell me, this is it's germane to the students as well, but with the civic discord that we're having, it's also a renewed focus on social injustice. From Tufts' point of view or perspective, are young people more engaged or less engaged, or what are you observing? So,
it's that definitely more engaged, and I just think this generation in particular, even starting with the millennials, I think, and that this is corroborated or here with the increase of social and information being so much more available. But I think just generally people are more aware. For example, I have a 21-year-old and a 19-year-old. Like, the second they were eligible to vote, they just went and made sure that they were registered, and they asked for some help and had some questions. But I don't really remember being that concerned about. I did it. I remember watching my parents do it, but I just don't remember being so super excited, like, I can't wait till I can vote. But be how this generation, or at least in certain pockets, people are approaching these kinds of things and like these causes, and
sure,
on the marches and the kind of like back in the 60s and 70s, which was a little bit before my time, but
unfortunately it wasn't before my
time. So I do think that there's been an awakening, but I also know that there's of the country and what our research calls civic deserts, and these places where mostly more rural areas where they don't have the same kind of information. It's they can't get to places as easily because it's so spread out. We don't have the same kinds of civic organizations that I certainly remember being a part of my small town when I was growing up. So we need to be concerned with how do we, instill that same kind of passion and purpose in the civic deserts.
Right. Well, let me throw you into the fire here for a second, because as I think about civics, and I'm wondering if Tufts is exploring this issue, but misinformation or denial or lying is really muddying the political process. Are you seeing an effect on civic engagement in that regard, Diane? So,
I mean, we're certainly doing a lot of work. One of my colleagues, who was previously a journalist at the Boston Globe, just finished teaching a class, basically like how to spot it, how to deal with it. So I do think that higher ed's trying to do their part in addressing it and teaching people how to be good consumers of media. But it's definitely troubling when you are seeing people in the highest, positions possible, kind of repeating things that the facts do not bear out, and kind of confusing people that maybe don't have the resources of students at a place like Tufts.
And that to me, on a personal level, is the most troubling time of part of our era, is that the abnegation of truth. And you can get away with it. I mean, sadly it's more Orwell than American, and it's disturbing. So we need a good grounding in the truth, but through the practice of civics. Would you agree with that? Or
I would. So I mean, I had a personal experience the other day where I posted something on social, that was I try not to post things that are politically divisive, but this was a case where a politician who didn't know anything about the topic that they were criticizing, and they called it was in response to an Army recruiting ad, and they said, like, the woke police or the cancel culture or something, right? They tried to these kinds of scary words, and a person who I know leans towards that person's political responded on my post like, thank you for clarifying this, because I had some personal information about this particular and so they said, well, thank you for sharing that. Like, I don't have any patience for all this woke PC crap. And so I wrote back and I said, hey, when I hear somebody say that, like this politician, I'm not interested, I'm too lazy, I don't care about other people enough to understand their perspective. And I know you as a person, and I know you're a good person because you just engage with me. I don't, but I'm just trying to tell you why I think it's problematic for you to say like, hate this woke stuff, because here's another way to think about this. And he was like, whoa, thank you so much. I really that.
Right, and that's the challenge is that I'm a firm believer in bipartisanship and always have been, and I still am to it. But when it's hard to have one bipartisanship when one party is not aligned with reality, so that's a threat to us all. And
right,
so
right.
And it puts a great stress on the system. So, and especially so, I worry about the generation that you teach, if they're absorbing this in a way that's constructive so that they can critically think and make choices that radiate their values. So great. Diane, sadly, we are racing through our talk time together, and we're coming to the end. And as I ask every guest a story about grace, do you have one that you wish to share with us? So
I do. It's I've talked about this before in other settings. It's kind of my defining moment in my life. So a moment that represents everything that I aspire to be in life. I grew up, kind of poor, at least lower middle class. My father was a bus driver. My mother worked in an office. We never had much money. And I went to an affluent college, and I was pretty embarrassed of that status.
Sure.
And did not think that a bus driver was an important, even though my father was very proud of it and did great. But I just sort of like, if someone asked me, what did my father do for a job? It works in transportation, or I'd avoid the question. And that somehow that this was a reflection on, me and my character. Mm-hmm. And so when my dad died fairly unexpectedly, at his funeral, we noticed as we're church, there was a woman standing outside who clearly had Down syndrome. Mm-hmm. We didn't know it was. She wasn't a family member, but we didn't think that much of it. But again, it's the middle of your dad's funeral. You're not thinking about these things. The whole ceremony, goes by, and at the very end, the funeral director brings the woman in front of us at the casket. And the funeral director said, this is Karen, and she'd like to say a few words. And Karen pulled out a letter, and she read this letter to the crowd, and it said, Mr. Ryan, bus driver, and he was the greatest man in the whole world. And every day for 5 years, he took me to my job, and he told me I did a great job. And, I'm going to miss him dearly. And I just want to tell his family, he's a person. So that taught me a really important lesson about the value of everyone as a leader and your ability to make a difference for other people. I just now spend a lot of time thinking about who is the person who cleans my office, and a person who waits on you at the drive-through, and just saying a kind word, and that, even if you think they're not important positions, they can be really important to somebody else. So,
Diane, that is such a wonderful and touching story, and thank you. And you really hit the root of grace, what your father did with the woman with Down syndrome, he treated her with respect and compassion, and he treated her like a human being, not an object or a lesser person because of her condition. And that's the humanity. And then how you've interpreted it is the daily act of reaching out to others. And I know you use this term, it's not random acts of kindness, it's intended acts of kindness. And when we strive to live in grace, and I know I fall short only every day, but it's still out there. But you've dimensionalized it in a way that made it tangible, and that yes, we all can act and make our world a better place. So I say thank you for that wonderful story, and thank you for what you're spending time with us today, because I believe the work that you're doing in civics is so important and so critical to our youth of America, but all of us too. And so it's been my honor to have you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to do this work, and thank you so much for inviting me to your show.
Great. And Diane, thank you for being here. And till next time, we'll say goodbye. So,
absolutely.